Oye, mi gente, Dímelo, mi gente. Welcome back to the second season of OMG Podcast. Thank you so much for sticking with us and tuning in. This is Viv Moran. I'm a multimedia artist from South Jamaica, Queens, and your favorite tia. At this moment, I would like to start us off with our daily affirmation. I want to invite you all, my beautiful gods and goddesses who tune in every week. And if this is your first time listening, welcome. I invite you to join us in as well. Affirmation. The more energy and intention I bring to my faith, the more fearless and free I am. Now that we have charged our inner spirit crystals, I will now introduce our guests. Natalie Torres-Haddad from Financially Savvy Latina. A two-time TEDx speaker, an international award-winning author from her 2012 book, A Bilingual Podcast Host of Financially Savvy in 20 Minutes, international keynote speaker and educator. Her activities have been featured in the Huffington Post, LA Times, 60-Second Docs, and a Honda commercial as herself a financial expert. Both have gotten over 2 million views since it was published. A first-generation college graduate in finance and an international business with a master's in public administration. She focuses on helping those in debt and keep working towards their financial independence. Born in El Salvador and raised in Inglewood during the LA riots, she quickly learned that the lack of higher education and financial literacy limits her community of basic human rights and equality in resources. She started investing in real estate and began her career traveling across the country advocating for financial empowerment and women empowerment. She has penned 2 books, Yes, You Can Without a Superman, a bilingual teen book, and How to Buy a Rental Property at a Young Age. During the release of our second season, I stated that our equipment was stolen, and we lost most of our footage from our LA trip. We worked so hard that week. We were able to salvage clips of interviews that we could compile to make episodes. Natalie's interview is one of those that we were able to salvage. From the beginning, I knew that this interview was going to be an emotional one. Natalie's from El Salvador. They immigrated during one of the toughest periods in El Salvador, their civil war. From the late 19th to the mid-20th centuries, El Salvador endured a chronic political and economic instability characterized by coups, revolts, and a succession of authoritarian rulers. Persistent socioeconomic inequality and civil unrest culminated in the devastating Salvadoran Civil War from 1979 to 1992, which was fought between the military-led government and a coalition of left-wing guerrilla groups. The conflict ended with the Chapultepec Peace Accords. This negotiated settlement established a multi-party constitutional republic, which remains in place to this day. However, the country continues to struggle with high rates of poverty, inequality, and crime. This is her story. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to do this.
Awesome, me too. I'm very excited to hear about, your story.
Well, thank you for having me. I think it's important to share our stories to hopefully have the people connect and maybe inspire or hopefully become more open to, other people's journeys, because there's so many different stories when we talk about this. So I'm excited to be a part of this.
So tell us how.
So my story is like many, I think, at least many immigrant stories are filled with, difficulty, and especially in my family, I'm from El Salvador. So for those that don't know where El Salvador is, it's the smallest country in Central America. And unfortunately had very many years of civil war, lasted at least 13 years. And the majority of my family had to, flee during that time. They fled majority to the States. because and it's a difficult topic to talk about, not just because I think a lot of people confuse what being an immigrant means too. There's so many different types of immigration, right? Types of immigrants. But there's also the ones that come for political asylum, or refuge, right? And sometimes I think I still have a hard time when people just say, oh, I'm an immigrant too. And I look at that sometimes where I'm like, well, you planned 2 years in advance before you immigrated. You guys sold everything you had and prepared yourself to come to this country. It's a privilege. It's a privilege, and that's stuff that I also look at like, wow, what a difference that is, as opposed to fleeing during a civil war. And so for my family, it was very difficult because my mother, her oldest brother, was killed. He was a civilian, and till this day it's hard for any of us to talk about this. And when he was killed, pretty much within a few months later, almost the entire family left, and it was because of the fear that they would be hurt. And they lived in the main city, so capital, so it was to the point where when the war was happening, it started to eventually get to the city. And when it happens, it was in the rural area. So at this point, it's getting this bad. And so they kind of had the mentality, we have to leave, because they feared for their lives and their children, obviously. But it was an instant leave everything behind. Both my grandparents were retired. They were in their 50s. And so imagine, and they worked so hard. They had a business. And homes, like they were ready to just relax, and enjoy their grandchildren, and they had a beautiful place where they lived. And my grandfather, he just passed away last year, but and he was 97, so blessed. But I love the way he said, you know what, we had to really start our lives all over again in a place we did not know the language. And my mom and him would say the same thing. They're like, it was the most difficult times of their lives for many reasons, but they said not only did they lost their country. My grandpa would say, my family is broken in two, because two of her sisters stayed behind with their family because their kids were too young. Yeah. And he's like, we lost our home, we lost everything we knew. And he's like, the worst part is I lost my son, and for many years it was difficult for my parents to tell us what happened. And I remember being 8 years old when they actually kind of told me on how it was, why they had to flee, because I remember writing a report in school. And this is how it is when you're a kid, you want to be like everyone else, and you think you're like everyone else. So the teacher said, I want you to write why do you live here, right? Because a lot of the kids were, not all of them, but a lot of them were immigrants too. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was a great homework assignment. So I wrote my paper and I had my mom read it. And she read it and she said, actually, we need to sit down and you need to really hear our story. Because she's like, we didn't come here for a better life. Because a lot of my friends were Mexican. So they had the same story. We're like, oh, my parents came here and wanted better jobs and all this. And I was like, no, we had good jobs. We had a good life. And then the war broke out. And so we had to leave everything behind. And so we left because we were scared that we would die. And hearing that as an 8-year-old is very like, what? I couldn't comprehend. And we kind of just left it at that. Yeah. We didn't talk about it for years. And then until, I'm going to start crying now I think about it, but not until my freshman year in college. No, not even. I think I was, maybe towards the end of my freshman year, I had to take I was a business major, so I didn't have to really take certain classes. But there was one that was it was called the Latin American Studies.
This is where it got super emotional for us. Being told the reality of why her family really left, it reminded me of my own story. My parents too had great jobs in Peru. But there was also an internal conflict that broke out during the 80s. Sendero Luminoso, a communist party in Peru. I also asked Natalie, how was her transition now living in LA, a city populated by mostly people of Mexican descent? This is what she said.
How that has affected the way I live in Los Angeles, because it's such a diverse city. We're so lucky that we have so many different cultures, but I think that gets lost too, where I used to hate it when I would hear people, especially in Los Angeles here, why is there so many Salvadorians? And and I especially since we're just a small country, right? We're the size of Connecticut. For most people, can't grasp what that size is. But I go, well, if you think about it, most people came in the 80s because of the Civil War, and back then, and the U.S. was aiding that. So this is a whole nother turmoil, right, to talk about, which we can get on another day. But like, how do you manage both of those conversations, right? Mm-hmm. So, and for us too, I think the hard part about our story is, not only now fleeing during a very difficult time, you're now mourning the loss of your family member. Yes. It affects everyone. My mom even says, like, even 4th of July, when you hear fireworks, that stuff still, it sounds like bombs. Like, I get freaked out. And, like, these things that I can only imagine how traumatic that is for them, or was. And, those are the things that I think we forget about. Like, even my dad cracked me up because he's like, most of my family and friends are Mexican too. So he goes, it was really difficult learning there's different things about our cultures, where he's like, I still remember, he said he remembers sitting at a restaurant asking for a quesadilla because he saw it on the menu, and he was so happy thinking it was a quesadilla, which is a tortilla with cheese. Yes. And he was thinking, oh, that's sweet pastry. Salvadorans, we don't have quesadillas. We have quesadillas, but they're a pastry. Yes. So he's like, I'm going to have it with my coffee and just enjoy it. And then he's like, oh, wait, this is very different. Our menus are going to be different from now on. And our accents will change. My accent is completely not off, but it's different. More than half of the time, people are like, where are you from? When I speak fluent Spanish, but it's so mixed that it depends. If I'm with my family, I think the Salvi accent comes out naturally. But when I'm just talking with my friends, it's like, it's a mix of not only Salvi, Mexican, my best friend's Cuban. I lived in Spain for a while, and guess what? All these accents completely change. Oh, completely.
Yeah, it's like you become, like, you absorb.
A hybrid, absolutely. Yeah. And so for many times I would think, like, am I not a good Spanish speaker? Or, but it's just because people couldn't understand which accent it was. Yes. So, I think when it comes to sharing, I guess, the story of coming over, it's still sometimes very painful. Definitely. But it's also, I never take my life for granted, because not only did I know my family sacrificed everything and feared for everything, but I also know how lucky we are.
So at this point, we've already started crying. From the stories we've shared and the similarities in our journeys, how as kids we both had this idea of an American dream that our parents wanted for us, until we heard the actual truth of why we really left our homeland. But I also wondered about my own privilege, my parents' privilege, how we were able to afford our visas, how my father's government job gave us the opportunity to migrate. Although Sendero Luminoso did affect Peru as a whole, it was mostly devastating for those people that lived in the Andean highlands. My family and I lived in Miraflores, Lima, an affluent neighborhood. It's like my privilege was staring back at me in my face. Mm-hmm. I didn't have that same journey. My parents, where I was born almost during like a little war that they were having in Peru with Sendero Luminoso. Wow. Yeah. And I was born during a curfew. Oh my God. So there was no taxis. Yeah, right. My mom had to go super far for me to be born. Yeah. And then my mom got pregnant again 4 years later with my little sister. Wow. And that's when they decided, like, we gotta go. Yeah. But they sold everything. They had great jobs. Right. We had a great home. Right. We had a nanny. We had all these privileges, for them to leave all that behind. Come here, start all over with these, like, little jobs. Yeah. Sleep on one bed. We slept on one bed. Yeah. Yeah. But my parents still tried. Yeah. Not to show us that struggle. Like, I even interviewed my mom and asked her what her immigrant story was, because I have, I saw things differently. Mm-hmm. How was it for my mom? Yeah. And I feel like in a way, she kind of glamorized it or sugar-coated everything.
And that's true. And I think we're gonna have to do another episode soon. But my grandfather told me, this is a whole nother story, but he told me, because everyone was telling me different sides on how we crossed, because I was a baby, right? And he told me And the fact that to see him choke up and cry, and he was, I want to say this was 10 years ago, he finally told me his side of the story. And I wanted to hear from different people because I'm like, you know, everyone has exactly, they might sugarcoat it, or obviously not everybody was there, you know, all these things that you hear, and hearing him and the way that you can see how painful it was for him to even say, and he was 87 at the time when he's telling me the story. And it's that you reminded of this privilege, but this is the silver lining, I think. The fact that we can remind ourselves that there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. Yes. That we can remind ourselves that these are stories that we need to continue to tell. Because even any of our friends, and I hear from other white people, I'm like, white people understand too. Their families were immigrants too at one point, if they, you know? And I go, we need to remind ourselves that these challenges will never go away if we stop telling these stories. So, I mean, it's amazing that you're doing this type of podcast, because not only it'll allow us maybe to not only heal, I think I'll always try to heal from this. But I think this is an important time in our lives where we figure out where do we stand, and kind of going back to social media. For me, I struggle sometimes when I post something because I'm like, am I being too raw? Am I hurting not only my career, but my image, or am I sharing too much? But when you see images like this, when you see the father and the little girl in the river, then I'm like, this is also an opportunity to not only educate people, but empower those that have not only the citizen status or even immigration. I see so many amazing people that are undocumented, that have so much, they're so brave, and what they're doing. And I always question myself, I'm like, why am I not doing enough? Because I know that I've been a citizen since I was 13 years old.
Another reason why I wanted to start this series of immigration stories, I question myself a lot. Why am I not doing enough? I could be doing a lot more. That picture of that little girl and her father that drowned crossing the river to get to the U.S., they have a story. I cried for days after looking at that image. Every time the news broadcasted their picture, my heart filled with so much anger. I wondered how many times the immigration office sent them running around with different papers to sign and file, how much money they spent traveling back and forth, and if they were denied a visa. This must have been their last resort, or was it their only option? The U.S. doesn't tell us that they have equal parts in the devastation of our homelands. The U.S. does a great job of selling us this American dream, but won't give details on how much our people will be exploited to reach that dream. Alright, so boom. At this time, I like to highlight some dope people who are doing amazing work in our communities. Let's give a big yurt to Jessica Lofton, aka Jessie Jumanji. When Los Angeles artist Jessie Jumanji started exploring her family history, she was blown away by the familiarity of the faces she saw in photographs. The pictures would soon inspire a masterpiece by Jumanji, a self-proclaimed Afro-futuristic at heart. An intentional marriage of African history and pop culture manifested in her brilliant photo series, Distant Relatives, Familiar Faces. The mind-blowing series offers visual pairings of famous Black faces with their historic and ancestral counterparts, combining pop culture iconography and the cosmos with the throwback Black and white images of tribal Africans, drawing existential links between Black heritage, the history of the world, and the metaphysical. Originally from Memphis, Tennessee, Jumanji recognized her personal sense of African identity, and she believed a certain knowledge of self. Due to the stripping of cultural identities, it's what's missing from Black culture today. But understanding and embracing the past and present is not all that matters to the visual artist. She also believes in the importance of looking towards the future as a community. Currently, Jessie has turned her masterpieces into tarot cards. These Afro tarot pays homage to Africa and depicts a variety of cultures, places, and symbols and artifacts from all over the motherland. Jessie Jumanji stays true to her Afrofuturistic collage style, creating vivid, ethereal compositions with each card. This carefully curated 78-card deck combines authentic African imagery with the traditional Rider-Waite themes, making it perfect for all experience levels. The Afro Tarot was created for people of the African diaspora seeking to incorporate an ancestral aspect in their spiritual journey. Okay, guys, we have reached the end of this episode, but before I bid you all adieu, I want to pose a question to you all, mi gente. This week, I want to ask, Oye, mi gente, what is your deepest fear? Piénsalo. Feel free to leave your insight and answers in the comment and review sections. Please, I really want to know. Alright, guys, this is it for this week's episode. A huge thank you to Natalie. This episode had both of us in our feelings. We cried, we share our experiences, our triumphs. I appreciate you sharing your story with us. You can find Natalie on Instagram at Financially Savvy Latina and through her website, financiallysavvyin20minutes.com. Also, thank you to everyone who took this emotional ride with us. I appreciate you. Remember to follow us at OMG Podcasts on Instagram. We are available on all your favorite streaming platforms. Be sure to subscribe and leave us a comment in the review section. Also follow at Deacon Media on IG. And if you want to know more about the Deacon Media Network and what we do, you can check out the entire Deacon Media family on deaconmedia.com.